Have you ever encountered something along the way that caused you the most pain you have ever experienced? I don't mean a sudden heart attack or an accidental gunshot, because those are all or nothing situations. And wait, before we continue, I know women will start talking about childbirth. Well, ladies, you've been riding this old horse too long. Childbirth is a voluntary pain, and for it you get the greatest reward on earth, so let's leave it at that. I'm talking about pain that pierces the soul and never goes away, continuing to affect your life long after it ends. The crappy thing about this is that I always expected it to some extent, but I allowed myself to relax. I began to believe that if it hadn't happened by now, it probably wouldn't happen. So I let my guard down and began to believe that what I stole was now mine. Let me tell you, all this talk about how crime doesn't pay is true. The sad thing is that if I had to do it again, knowing what would happen, hell, I probably would have done it anyway. My name is William Place. My friends and family call me Will. When all this happened, I had already been married for 8 years to the most beautiful, magical woman I have ever known. It's strange, but she doesn't think so herself. I think over the years I've gotten so used to seeing her in various stages of beauty and self-care that I forgot how truly stunning she is. Most people, when they see her entering a store or walking down the street, look after her. My son and I don't even pay attention to it. For us, she is simply darling or mom. The strangest thing about Peyton is that she almost never tries her best. Peyton can take a shower, put on some lip gloss, put on a dress, brush her hair, and stand next to women who have spent hours at the hairdresser, salon, and makeup artist and look much better, so there is no competition. Peyton is an angel in the flesh. It's a lousy thing about growing up in a mid-sized city. Well, about everything. If you grow up in a big city, you're just one of millions of people, so what happens to you doesn't really matter, and people tend to forget about it. When you grow up in a small town, you're just one of several, and most people get along and are somewhat friendly, so you pretty much already know who the bad guys are. In mid-sized cities, there are enough people that you can't possibly meet or know everyone, so the bad guys have a place to hide. But the town is small enough that everyone still knows when something bad is happening. They just probably don't know the people involved. Almost everyone in our circle knew Larry Miller. I think I first heard about it when I was about 18 years old. Larry was my age, and people around town called him the Prince of Sex. There was a rumor that Larry was the guy who should lock up his daughters. If there was a woman nearby and Larry noticed her and became interested in her, he would probably end up getting her into bed. I thought for a long time that Larry was probably some kind of grandmother's fairy tale character. You know, just a story they made up to scare the average guy into getting married. He was like Babeka or Wendigo, only instead of eating the kids, it was more like, oh shit, you should have married her. Now she's with Larry Miller. In the beginning, there were so many women in our town who got married right out of high school or halfway through college that I believe many girls simply gave up the name Larry when they got tired of waiting for a proposal. Many of them were big-assed country girls who weren't generally considered. Okay, I know what I'm about to say sounds sexist, chauvinistic, or misogynistic, but sorry, it's the truth. Now, many of them, including my sister, were generally considered training girls. A workout girl is someone you have a relationship with and have sex with and do all the things everyone else does, but you're never going to marry her. In many cases, there is something wrong with them, or a couple of things, or even nothing is right, but for some reason you just don't see yourself with them for the rest of your life. The bad thing about this is that the workout girl never realizes that she is a workout girl. She truly believes that you are her only one and vice versa, so she starts applying pressure. This can be very subtle, such as reducing the frequency of sex, or a little less subtly, like taking you to a local jewelry store and stopping in front of a display of engagement rings. Well, Larry Miller turned a lot of training girls into wives just by mentioning his name. I heard my sister Summer make plans with her best friend who also used it successfully. My sister, Summer, had never even met Larry Miller, but she told her boyfriend Mark Time that she met the most interesting guy that day at work. Mark asked her what was so interesting about him, and she said she couldn't explain it, but there was something about him. Mark asked his name. I think he just wanted to find the guy and tell him to stay away from Summer. When Summer said, "Larry Miller, do you know him?" Mark turned pale. The thought of his constant source of sex disappearing drove him crazy, and the thought of being one of those guys who gets a girl back after she slept with Larry Miller was even worse. Everyone in town would laugh at him. Hell, if Summer got pregnant 10 years later, people would still be wondering if Larry was actually the baby's father. So Mark stood up and proposed to Summer. The next day they went and bought a ring. I think Mark was hoping for a long engagement, but before he knew it, they were married. The same strategy worked for a couple of Summer's friends. There were probably a lot of guys in our town who realized years later that they had fallen into a trap, and it was too late to do anything about it. I myself finally got the chance to meet Larry in my third year of college. He, like me and almost everyone else from our town, went to the state university, which was about 20 miles from the city. To be honest, I didn't see anything special in Larry. He was taller than me back then and a little bigger, but he was just a regular guy. But when I saw him among the girls, my opinion changed. Larry was as smooth as can be. This trait was probably the result of all his practice. He was also the biggest liar I have ever met. Larry just made stuff up, and somehow it never backfired on him. There was also something more to Larry's success than could be seen with the naked eye. I've seen several guys try to use the same phrases that Larry used with impunity, but they never succeeded. Larry could also walk into a party full of women from another school and take one of the girls upstairs within 5 minutes. After seeing it in action, I still couldn't figure it out. Years later, I came to the conclusion that it probably had something to do with pheromones, but then it was a secret. At university, Larry left a trail of broken relationships, not to mention broken hearts. As more and more women fell under his spell, his nickname changed from the Prince of Sex to the Baron of Delirium. Most of the guys on campus hated Larry with a passion. He had very few male friends, and most of those who did were sycophants who only wanted leftovers of Larry. I watched the drama from the sidelines. I wasn't interested in that. I considered college to be the last resort of childhood before the start of my real life. I didn't get into long-term relationships because I was sure I wouldn't stay in my small town after I graduated. In fact, I didn't even plan to finish my studies here. I wanted to get a master's degree in engineering. Although our university offered such a program, I wanted my master's degree to come from a more prestigious institution, such as the University of Michigan or the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I had girlfriends or girlfriends who were my friends during my studies, but I tried not to have any obligations. I was a fairly attractive guy, so a couple of times during my studies girls spoke to me about consistency or commitment. I quickly left. One girl in my senior year even tried to use the Larry Miller trick on me. Katie and I became very close. She even started leaving things at my apartment and had a few things and a toothbrush there because she often stayed over at my place. Katie was so smart about this that she even knew all my neighbors. Hell, I didn't even know most of these people, so I thought it was funny that she knew them. But suddenly one evening, while we were watching TV, I started yawning. I wasn't actually sleepy, I wanted sex. "You know, I met the most interesting guy today," she said. I was so determined to enjoy myself that I continued to listen to it. "What's so interesting about it?" I asked. "I don't know," she said. She had this strange, indifferent tone in her voice, as if she was remembering something really special. The tone in her voice was either fake or real. If it was fake, then the bitch was trying to manipulate me. If he was real, then she had already slept with Larry or thought about it. "Get your purse," I said. "Let's go somewhere." She looked stunned. I grabbed her hand and pulled her out of the apartment. I made sure she took her purse. We rode around in circles for a while, and she had the biggest smile on her face. In her mind, she had successfully used Miller's trick on me. I think she was really surprised when I stopped the car in front of one of the dorms on campus and parked. I got out of the car and pulled her out after me. I think everyone can imagine her surprise when I sat her on a bench in the park that overlooked the dorm building. I dropped to one knee in front of her and took her hand in mine. I looked into her big, beautiful eyes, and believe me, Katie was fine. She was a beautiful woman. She had big, soft breasts that I liked to caress. She had great legs and an incredible butt. Katie was one of those buxom types like Marilyn Monroe, and like I said, she was fine. She would be a wonderful wife for someone, but not for me. As hard as it may be to say, as a guy, I wanted romance and magic. Otherwise, we could just remain sex friends. I took Katie's hand in mine and looked into her big, beautiful eyes and said my part. Kat, dear, I said, um, the guy you met this afternoon, interesting. Was it Larry Miller? Yes, she said. Why do you ask? Because if you sit here on the bench for a while, you'll probably see him staggering back from fucking someone's girl. That hostel is across the street. Good night, I said. I got back into the car and rolled down the window. I drove my first car then. It was a 1998 Ford Mustang in Arctic white. It was only a 6, and it had those annoying rims that were painted the same color as the body, but it was a great car for a college student. Katie was still in shock when I rolled down the window. Your dorm is just a few blocks in that direction, I told her. When you come to pick up the rest of your things from my house tomorrow, please leave the key on the table. She was too shocked to even react. She just looked at me with wide eyes as I drove away. I felt like scum. It just didn't seem like my usual behavior. But I wasn't going to allow myself to be manipulated into something I wasn't ready for. Like I said before, I've seen too many guys fall for Miller's trick and end up in relationships they didn't want. When I get married, I want it to be with someone who has truly impressed me. I wanted to marry someone with whom I had a lot in common. I didn't want to marry someone just because we felt comfortable together and I liked having sex with her. It's so hard to say when you're a guy. I wanted romance and magic. Otherwise, we could just be sex buddies. When I finally got home that night, it was well after midnight and I had early classes the next day. I received several calls while driving, trying to calm down and get my thoughts in order. Most of them were from Katie, so I ignored them. The next day, she continued to call, and I continued to ignore. Finally, my phone rang, and I could see from the caller ID that it wasn't Katie. It was my sister, Summer. I was immediately worried about my parents, so I answered. Hi, Will, she said. We need to talk. My sister and I aren't very close, so I wondered what she might want. My sister is the type of woman who is always there when she needs it. Are Mom and Dad okay? I asked. We're all a little worried, she replied. Did you have an accident? I asked. Everything is fine. We didn't have an accident, she said. It's about Katie. Why are you treating her so badly? She's all on edge and crying. We all thought you were going to announce something soon. Why the hell did you all think that? I asked, feeling a catch. Well, you guys get along so well together, and, I talked to her a little, and she said, you thought I was stupid enough to fall for the bullshit you used to trick poor Mark into marrying you, right? I snorted. Yes, she said hesitantly. Summer, I'm not an idiot, I said. Such tricks don't work on me. I'm not going to do anything that I don't think is right for me. I'm not ready to get married. I'm not going to start a career in a local factory and buy a house to settle down. I want more from life. That's what Mark wanted, she said. Sometimes men have no idea what's good for them. You sit on your asses playing video games and dreaming about Victoria's Secret and Lamborghini models when the real world and perfectly good women who love you are right in front of you. I just don't want you to miss a good opportunity. So you set this all up? I asked. Well, yes, she said hesitantly. Who cares? Because now, instead of losing my sex partner, I lost my sister, I said, hanging up. Over the next few days, I fought off comments and questions from family and friends about why I was acting like an asshole. I had 2 standard lines that I told them and a great ending move. The first phrase was a story about how I have a plan for life, and I told them what that plan was. The second part was that I told them about the need to be in love before getting married. Finally, I told them about my sister's little trick and how she used it to get Mark to propose to her and tie him down with her. But I wanted to get married on my own schedule, not because Summer decided it was time. This seemed to make sense to most people. I think this caused some problems for Summer when Mark called me and we talked. He didn't divorce her, but it did put his marriage in a different light. I think Mark realized he had been tricked. He couldn't go to college. He had to start working for his father because Summer got pregnant before they could finish. Summer is 2 years older than me, and Larry Miller was my age, so Mark now understands that there was probably nothing going on between them. I think by the time everyone experienced what I did, the whole town knew that I wanted to get a master's degree in engineering and that I wanted true love. What made it even funnier was that what ended up happening was almost exactly what Summer had planned for me. I tried so hard to avoid the girl Summer was manipulating me into getting caught with Miller that I ended up actually getting caught with Miller. About 3 weeks after the incident with Katie, she was still stalking me. She started trying to find me at home, and I knew that I would have to talk to her eventually, but it wasn't there yet. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I hoped that the semester would end and I could avoid her forever. Everyone knew that I was going to MIT in the fall, which included moving to another state. I was offered a summer internship in Florida. If I could hold out for another 2 or 3 weeks, it would be all over. However, one day when I left the apartment, I saw Katie sitting in my car, reading a book. It was a warm day, and the car was parked in the shade, so it looked like it was going to be there for a while. I had actually only planned to drive to the library to do some research, so rather than confront her and get into an argument or a long, tearful conversation, I decided to do the mature thing. I went out the back door. I was already on the next block on my way to the library when I passed a bus stop. I had just passed her when I realized that the woman at the bus stop was crying. For the sake of everyone's understanding, I must point out that I am actually not as much of a scumbag as my actions may seem. I'm just a regular guy who wants to get what he earned. I like to have a plan and a moral system and stick to both. The woman crying at the bus stop struck a chord with me. I couldn't pass by without at least trying to see if I could help somehow. She was a small, fragile girl in a blue hoodie. Turks of reddish waves burst out from under it. The second miracle was that she managed to pull the hood over all this hair. When I asked if there was anything I could do to help, she looked up at me, and I saw the biggest miracle of my life. My crying girl at the bus stop was Peyton Carlisle. So, Peyton Carlisle is the most beautiful female creature in our city. Every guy in town, as far as I remember, was in love with her. Hell, my dad was in his 40s, and even he looked up every time someone mentioned Peyton Carlisle. I couldn't understand why she was sitting at the bus stop crying, so I asked again if I could help. "Thanks for asking, Will," she sobbed, "but no one can help me. My parents will kill me." I was shocked to see her crying like that. I was shocked that she knew my name. "You know me?" I asked. "Will, we've been going to school together since elementary school," she said with sadness in her voice. "Peyton, whatever happened, we will fix it," I said. "No, we can't fix this," she screamed. "Peyton, I'm an engineer," I laughed. "I can fix or rebuild anything. If I can't make it better than it was, then at least I can make it work." "I'm pregnant," she said. "If there was a way to pull words back into your mouth, I would pull mine back." But I just sat down on the bench next to her and tried to give her a supportive ear. Peyton's parents were extreme Catholics. She had an uncle who was a minister, and her entire family was deeply involved in the church. She wasn't as loyal as the others, nor were any of her siblings, but the consequences of her situation were quite dire. Part of this situation manifested itself because of who she was. Peyton is so pretty that guys fell in love with her when they looked at her. She just didn't see it. Her two sisters were the same. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a girl. For most of her life, she was only allowed to date guys who had her parents' approval. Mostly, they were guys she had met at or at church events. So, just a couple of months ago, Peyton was a virgin at 23. Then she met a new guy at her church. He had just enrolled, and it turned out that he also studied at our college. His name was Larry, and he impressed everyone at the church. In fact, he first asked her father if he could date her. Peyton put Larry off for 2 or 3 weeks, which for Larry, who was used to having sex with a girl on the first date and then leaving, was something of a record. And Larry stayed with Peyton for a week or so after he got her. He then moved on and started avoiding her. When Peyton didn't get her period, she took a test and called Larry when she found out it was positive. Larry told her not to worry and that everything would work out. He continued to avoid her. He told her that home tests were often wrong and that she should get a real exam from a doctor. She made an appointment and asked him to come with her. When the day of the meeting arrived, she could not find Larry anywhere. He passed his final exams ahead of schedule and left. "What was Larry's last name?" I asked. "Miller," she said with tears in her eyes. "I don't know what I'll do. My whole family will disown me." "Peyton, sooner or later you'll have to tell them," I said. "Part of us, as adults, accepts responsibility for what we do. If you wait until you start to express yourself, it will be much worse for you than if you were honest and upfront about it. Worry, your parents will love you no matter what, and your friends will support you too." "You think so?" she asked. By then we had talked most of the day. I took her to a small restaurant, we ate and talked some more. She told me that I made her feel much better, and if she had a boy, she would name him after me. "I'm sure as hell not going to call him Larry," she said. She gave me her phone number and told me to call her the next day. Then she asked me to call this number right away so that it was on my phone. I walked her back to the dorm and flew away. I spent most of my life seeing Peyton around town or school and couldn't even imagine us talking, let alone having her phone number. As stupid as it may sound, I fell so deeply in love with Peyton that day that there was nothing I would do for her. Even when I walked home after leaving her, I remembered hundreds of small details about her childhood. I remembered the times when I saw her smile and was in awe of how pretty she was. I remembered the grace with which she handled awkward moments and realized that, like most guys I knew, I had probably always had a little crush on Peyton. I just never thought, even in my wildest dreams, that I'd have a chance. Luckily for me, everything turned out the way I wanted that day. When I returned to my apartment, Katie was gone. She left a note on my car saying she really wanted to talk to me, so I decided to call her the next day. Unfortunately for me, life intervened. I've never been dirty. I grew up in a house that was always immaculate, so I tried to keep my apartment that way too. Since Katie spent the better part of a year auditioning for the role of the wife, she really helped. So wife, my apartment has never been a typical bachelor pad. I was trying to catch up on a day of studying when the phone rang. I assumed it was Katie and decided it was time to call it a day. "Will, it didn't work," said a crying voice. "They kicked me out. I even surprised myself." "I'll be right there," I said. I was in the car and already moving before I even realized what I was doing. Like I said, I've always tried to be a good guy, but sometimes I act on my emotions and let them take over. This often gets me into problems that could have been avoided with a little rational thinking. I arrived at Peyton's parents' house and knocked on the door. The door slowly opened and Peyton's father stood there, holding a drink in his hand. He was clearly upset. He was also not at that moment the pious church man whom everyone knew and respected. "What do you need?" he asked, taking a sip. "I came to see Peyton," I said. He looked at me and his face turned red. "You're the one who—" he started, and for some reason I was just as angry as he was. Looking back, I understand that at that moment we both had misunderstandings. If only one of us would just slow down and let the other one do the talking, perhaps everything would have turned out better. But for me, it would be worse. If we had taken the time to talk or listen to each other, he might not have hated me, but I probably wouldn't have ended up with Peyton. "Yes," I said, "I'm the one who—" I was going to say, "I'm the one who told her to tell you that she was pregnant." "Well, good," he said. "You can take her with you." I later found out that he was just upset and never intended to kick Peyton out of the house. "I'll take her," I said. Peyton's mother looked relieved. Peyton herself was scared and shocked. "But, Dad, she began. "Get out of my house," he said. Peyton already had a small suitcase packed. I'm guessing her mother was going to send Peyton to stay with a relative until things calmed down, but things didn't work out that way. I carefully walked a crying Peyton to my car. We drove around for a while, and I finally got her to talk. Then I persuaded her to eat, and we talked some more. The topic of a medium-sized city came up again. A lot of people knew who I was, and everyone knew who Peyton was. So when people in town saw us together, especially hunched over in the gazebo and talking very seriously, it spread quickly. When I insisted that we be seated in a non-smoking area and Peyton shyly explained to the waitress that she was pregnant, that was the last straw. Rumors of me allegedly impregnating Peyton Carlisle spread throughout the city in less than 2 days. That first night, we didn't get back to my apartment until almost midnight. Peyton fell asleep in my car. We tried to visit a few of her friends, but unfortunately, Peyton's friends were all good girls who she went to church with and went to school with. They were all shocked that she was pregnant, including her best friend Millie, who she had studied with the previous day. I didn't understand how she could turn from a monster to an ordinary person in one day. Finally, I told her that we could go to my apartment, and she nodded. I took out a pillow and blanket. She headed straight to the couch, and I grabbed her hand. I took her to the bedroom. She was so tired that she didn't mind. I closed the door behind her and went to the sofa. The next day, I had an early exam. It was my last. I woke Peyton up and asked if she had any classes left. She said no, so I let her sleep and went to take the exam. When I returned, I prepared a big breakfast. The smell of food seemed to wake Peyton because she quietly walked out and sat down at the table. She just looked at me. "Are you hungry?" I asked, and she nodded. I think she was too early for morning sickness, and not all women experience it. I think everything Peyton ate just made her more beautiful. Realistically speaking, she was probably just more comfortable and less hungry, but I had to feed my fantasy. "Well, what are we going to do now?" she asked. God, how I loved hearing the word "we" from her. "Do you mean today or in the long term?" I asked. "Both," she said, peering at me. I really liked this feeling. "Peyton, we have some decisions to make," I said. Hearing her say "we" made me light up. When I said "we," her face literally lit up. "Okay, the first decision is yours, Peyton," I said. "Do you really want this baby?" She nodded very quickly. "I made a very bad mistake," she said. "But killing a child would be even worse." I heard echoes of her Catholic upbringing, but as I told her, this choice was hers. We spent the rest of the day making plans and making appointments. That's when I realized how sheltered Peyton's life was. She didn't know how to do anything. Even the courses Peyton took at university were aimed at making her an ideal wife someday. We attended a meeting with Peyton's local doctor and priest. They both looked at me as if I had put on the Mona Lisa. We got Peyton the vitamins she needed and signed up for parenting and childbirth classes. We also received a very stern lecture from the priest and made appointments for both of us to meet him separately. It took a couple of days for things to settle down and for us to get into a rhythm. But we found that we got along great and felt very comfortable together. Then the phone calls started. "Will, the girl on the phone is for you," Peyton said. There was a worried expression on her face. "Her name is Summer," she said. I ran up, took the phone from her, and hung up. "Is it your girlfriend?" she asked. "This is not a girl, Peyton," I said seriously. "This creature was once my sister." Her face lit up again. The next time the phone rang, it was much more serious. It was one of Peyton's sisters. She had news for Peyton. Her father was still angry and was getting angrier every day. He forbade everyone from having contact with Peyton. Even after talking with the priest, who could not reveal information about Peyton, he continued to be indignant. He insisted that she should never set foot in their home again, and if she does not marry before the birth of the child, She will be expelled from the family forever. He refused to allow any illegitimate children to destroy their family legacy. Then the priest began to put pressure on us. I think he believed that if we did something to appease Peyton's father, everything would work out. But this only made me angry. I told him we could handle it. Peyton asked me that night what my plans were for the summer before she intervened in my life. I told her about the internship in Florida and then moving to Boston, and she cried. I woke up early the next morning and left before she got up. I think Peyton assumed I was going to school. I went to the factory and submitted an application. They were always looking for young engineers and hired me on the spot. It was Thursday, and I didn't have to start working until the following Monday. I went to meet the priest alone after that. Peyton's meeting was scheduled for the next day. When I returned home, I realized that something was wrong. Peyton was fully dressed, and her suitcase was by the door. I was hoping you could take me to the bus station, she said. Peyton, I'll take you anywhere, I said. Where are you going? I'll go to Aunt Sally's, she said. I thought you didn't love her, I said. I don't like it, she said sadly. But she's the only person who will accept me, and I can't ruin your life, Will. You're supposed to be in Florida next week, so I have somewhere to go. Peyton, I already called the company in Florida and told them I won't be coming. I start working at the plant next week. They will pay me a great salary, and we will have benefits once I work 90 days. So everything will be fine. Besides, it will give you the opportunity to use that expensive education that your parents paid for. A strange expression appeared on her face, and she hugged me. She returned to me a couple of hours later with a serious expression on her face. Will, can we talk about something? She asked. I just smiled and nodded. I don't know why you do all this for me. For us, she corrected herself. But I need to ask you for an even bigger favor. Okay, I said, I will do it. Her face brightened. Will, you should probably let me ask the question and explain my plan first, she said. Peyton, you already know I would probably do anything for you, I said. She turned and walked away and then started crying on my bed. I walked up to her and started massaging her back. Peyton, what happened? I asked. It's me, Will, she cried. I'm just asking for too much. Ever since I met you, I've only taken from you without giving anything in return. But this is just too much. If it's too much, I'll tell you, I said. What do you want, Peyton? Even when I asked, my mouth opened in surprise, and she looked at me. No, Peyton, I suddenly said. I absolutely refuse. Even the most beautiful woman I've ever seen has limits. I absolutely refuse to sell my Mustang and buy a minivan. Do you think I'm beautiful? She asked. Do you want a minivan? I asked in the same tone. No, I wanted a year of your life, she said seriously. Peyton, I'm 22 years old, I said. I still have many years ahead of me. You can take one of these. Seriously? She asked, and her face brightened even more. You really don't want a minivan? Can I keep my car? I asked. Then she hugged me with all her might and shook her head, looking at me. Yes, you can keep your car, she said, still smiling and shaking her head. Okay, what do I need to do? I asked. Do I need to become a Catholic and go to church for a year? Of course not, she said. But you'll have to go to church a few times, like when we get married and... When are we what? I asked. Will, I know this is a lot to ask, she began, but I thought it through. I looked at it from my father's point of view. He really values our family history and other people's opinions. So if we get married before the baby is born, there won't be a scandal. I'm sure that once we get married, he will accept it, and when the child is 5 or 6 months old, we will file for divorce, and you can go to MIT a year later. For the family, divorce will be less shameful than if I remained an unwed mother. Being an unwed mother is usually perceived as the parent's failure to raise properly. But divorce can be explained by many reasons, and of course, you will have a friend for life and my eternal gratitude. Okay, I said, but I was a little offended. Half the town already thinks I got you pregnant, I said. I love you, Will, she said. Thank you so much. You're welcome, I said. That's unlikely to happen. Why not? She asked. Because Larry will come to his senses and come back for you before the baby is born, I said. Why would he waste his time? She said. It was the first curse word I'd ever heard her say, and there was a bit of anger in it. There's nothing here for him. My child doesn't need him in his life, and I don't need him either. I wish with all my soul that I had met you before I met him. I don't think I heard Peyton swear again for weeks after that. The next time she swore was on our wedding night. The next day, at a meeting with the priest, we told him the news. Peyton also met my family that day. My mom adopted Peyton that very day. My father kept patting me on the shoulder. He looked like a cat that had swallowed a canary. Even my brother-in-law smiled at me. Summer wasn't so happy, but even she came to her senses when she was included in the wedding planning. The announcement of the wedding date appeared on the church notice board, so her parents must have seen it, but we still haven't heard a word from them. So many people came to our wedding that we had to let some go. The church simply could not accommodate them all. I managed to get her mom through the side door so she could watch the ceremony without being seen, and I pointed her out to Peyton as we kissed to mark the end of the ceremony. The strangest thing about it was that when we exchanged a kiss, I was expecting just a formal kiss, but Peyton pulled me towards her for a full-on passionate kiss that momentarily plunged the church into silence. Her technique showed that she hadn't kissed many men, but her passion surprised me. My parents gave us a week-long cruise for our honeymoon, and we were supposed to leave at a party after the ceremony. Peyton held my hand as we left the church, and everyone in town seemed happy. On the way to the airport, Peyton asked me why I was smiling so much. "Are you breathing so relieved because the ceremony is over?" she asked. Honestly, I don't understand men. Don't you understand that a woman's wedding day is the pinnacle of her life? It's the bride's day. Your mom and I have been planning this day for the last 6 weeks. I barely fit into my dress. My little belly is already starting to show up. In a few weeks, everyone in town will know, if they don't already. Well, don't worry, I said. I'm sure your next wedding will be better. My next what? She asked. Wedding, I said. She looked at me strangely. We boarded the plane, Peyton carrying her veil and a thank you book. She filled out thank you cards for everyone who attended the wedding. She would have even more thanks after we got through all the wedding gifts. She spent an hour telling the flight attendants about our wedding. The plane landed late, and we had to hurry to catch the ship. But we made it. We settled into our cabin, and then went to explore the ship. We were both quite tired after the journey and all the celebrations, so we had dinner in the cabin. Peyton went into the bathroom, and I grabbed a blanket. When she came out of the bathroom, I watched her from the other side of the room. I almost laughed. She was wearing tiny white panties, white stockings and garters, a lacy white bodice, and the same long veil she had just gotten married in. She carried a small bouquet in addition to the one she had dropped off at the church. She walked slowly towards the bed as she had walked down the aisle just a few hours ago. She stood in front of the bed, looking like an angel. My eyes widened in surprise. Her breasts stood like 2 trembling watermelons on her chest. Her legs were perfect. Stories could be written just about her ass. Even the small belly under her breasts only added to her sexiness. Suddenly, she threw the flowers on the bed and looked around. "Will," she screamed, "why the hell are you on the couch?" She crossed the room and just dropped down in front of me. She crossed her arms over her chest, clearly angry. "What's wrong, Peyton?" I asked. "Remember I told you about memories and how important they are to a woman," she said. "You just ruined my wedding night. Now come over here and make it right." "Do what's right?" I asked. "Peyton, you're so caught up in our fake wedding that—" "What the hell is a fake wedding?" she snorted. "Our wedding was real. Of course, it will last a year or so. But for this year, I will be the best damn wife a man has ever had. Will, you have already done more for me than anyone else in my life. I will do everything possible so that you will never regret what you did for me. Now lie down in this damn bed." She bucked back into the bathroom and came out a few minutes later. She lay down next to me and looked at me with a combination of fear and desire. It turned out that she had sex with Larry only twice, and the first time she was a virgin. Neither time lasted long, so she was unprepared for what happened that night. I started by massaging her all over. With each piece of underwear removed, I easily massaged every inch of exposed skin. I then started from her toes and kissed my way back up her body. I spent a lot of time on her breasts, then on her pregnant belly. And finally, we had sex. I held her tenderly, and she hugged me back. Then I noticed that she was crying. I had heard about Catholic wine and wanted to try to console her. Peyton, we're married, so it's not a sin and— Will, shut up, she suddenly said. I just wanted you to be happy, I said, and I didn't regret that. Will, did you see what happened between us? She said. Did you feel what I felt when our bodies bumped against each other like two animals? The only thing I regret is that it wasn't you who got to me first. The only thing I think in a Catholic way is that, God, I wish it were your child. She rolled over and we spooned. She put my hands on her chest. Peyton, who said it wasn't? I asked. What's wrong? She said. Peyton, only 4 of us know that I'm not the one who got you pregnant. Me, you, Larry, and God. No one else has any idea. Everyone in town thinks this is my child, so why not treat him as such? We'll talk about this later, she said. Can we do this again? By morning, Peyton and I had tried a few more things. We're back in town much closer than we were before the wedding, and Peyton has a new walk. Peyton was the wife every man dreams of. Her public displays of affection made every guy I knew seething with envy. Even while heavily pregnant, Peyton was the sexiest girl on 2 legs. We went to classes to prepare for childbirth and walked a lot in the evenings. My parents and friends helped us when we moved into a medium-sized house. We bought the house more as an investment than anything else. When our marriage ends, I could live in it or sell it. Peyton will likely move back in with her parents. Larry got a great job in sales for a company in New York. He came to town several times a year, but we never ran into him during Peyton's pregnancy. When the baby was born, we named him William James Place Jr. He was a happy little boy, and everyone loved him. I was handing out candy cigars at the hospital and noticed that one of the guys I had just given one to got a nod from Father Peyton. He looked at me and his gaze softened, and he nodded. When he nodded to me, I felt sad because I wasn't sure this is the beginning of the end. Of course, I took a few days off from work to be in the hospital every day with Peyton and the baby. Peyton grabbed my hand as if it was a life preserver, and she drowned every time I returned to the room. The day after the birth, a nurse from the hospital records department came and gave me a stack of insurance forms and Will Jr.'s birth certificate to sign. I handed it to Peyton, who smiled, handed it back to me, and told me I should sign it. So I did. Over the next few days, almost every person we knew in town came to visit us or see the baby. I was very shocked when a very beautiful girl with brown hair came up to me and hugged me. Then she kissed me on the cheek, and I almost fainted. A guy a couple of years younger than me came up and shook my hand. I thought he might be her boyfriend or husband and might be angry too, but he just patted me on the back. Before I could understand what was happening, they were gone. They had obviously just come from meeting the baby, and I guessed that they just felt good when they saw him. I wondered what was so special about babies that the sight of one child, even if it belonged to someone else, gave people hope. Looking at Will Jr. through the glass, I realized that my plan would not work. I did all this for Peyton. I tried to keep my distance, but the fact was that I loved her. When I first agreed to the scam, or whatever it was just a chance to get to know her. And no matter how stupid it may seem, most guys will do absolutely anything for a beautiful woman, especially if she's in trouble. Women have a maternal instinct and will do anything to protect their child. Men have a knight in a shining armor complex, and we need to go help the damsels in distress. But somewhere along the way, I seriously fell in love with Peyton, and when this all ends in a few months, I will be in great pain. Those who fly the highest always suffer the most when they fall, and for the past few months I have been living as close to heaven as it was possible on earth. Then there was Will Juar. He was just 1 day old, and for some reason, when I looked at him, I felt a connection that I shouldn't have had. He wasn't my biological child, but I loved that wrinkled, wriggling little bundle of flesh just as much as if he was. At that moment, I seriously thought about running out of that hospital and never returning. When Peyton returns to heaven to her perfect family, I will be the one who will cry and miss her. I decided the best way to do this was to leave her a note explaining why I did it. I was trying to figure out what to write when I felt someone standing behind me. "He's so handsome, isn't he?" she said. It was the same woman from earlier. I just nodded. "Why are you crying?" she laughed. "You and Peyton are probably the happiest people on earth right now. I've never seen my sister so happy, and a lot of the credit for that is probably yours. My mom was here twice, yesterday and today. Even my grumpy old dad was here yesterday. Once he came, there was no stopping Mom. He still claims that Peyton is persona non grata in the house, but he's not fooling anyone. Oh, we've never met, have we? I'm Julie, Peyton's older sister. The person I was with earlier is our brother and your brother-in-law, Jeff. You're Will, right?" I just nodded. "You are so happy. You have a nice home, a perfect baby, and each other. Will, my sister loves you very much. I have never seen her like this. We just went up to her room. Every time she says your name, she glows. I came down here to tell you that she wants you to come back to her room when you're done looking at the baby and wondering how we're going to get him home. These are her words, not mine. So I'll go see you, brother-in-law." That's all. There was no easy way out for me. I realized at that moment that I could not leave Peyton until she herself told me that I was no longer needed. As I watched Julie leave, I noticed a couple of things that I found interesting. She was followed by guys who crashed into walls or tripped trying to look at her, and she didn't even notice. Julie, when we spoke, seemed to think of herself as a simple girl. She thought Peyton was somehow gifted or lucky to have me. When I returned to Peyton's room, she was talking to the nurse. She smiled when she saw me and turned her cheek. The nurse looked at me and smiled. "Come on, kiss her," she said. "I think everyone in town knows that you do a lot more than just kiss." Peyton smiled even wider and blushed. But she moved her cheek and kissed me on the lips, putting her tongue in my mouth. I was a little confused. Then I noticed my mom, my dad, and my sister walking past the nurse. "God, haven't you done enough of this already?" my sister laughed. "You shouldn't excite him like that, Peyton," my mom said. "You know, it'll be a while before the doctor clears you to return to, activity." "Maybe we just don't tell the doctor," Peyton giggled. "Besides, there are all sorts of, activities." My father's eyes nearly popped out of his head. It was strange to hear someone as angelic as Peyton sound like she was dying to have sex. My sister and my father have not seen the baby yet. I took them to the newborn room so they could see him. Peyton and my mom chatted happily as we left. I thought that Peyton, in addition to her striking beauty, had qualities that I had never suspected. She was also quite smart. Everything went as she predicted. She was also a damn good actress. Much of this was probably due to her beautiful, guileless face. She was so beautiful that even when she was talking complete nonsense, you just wanted to believe her. Again, I wondered about the people she left behind. My father was in awe of her. My mother loved her like a second daughter. Even my damn sister, a con artist herself who caught her husband, succumbed to Peyton's hook, line, and rod charms. Am I the only one who saw through this? And to tell you the truth, I only knew because I was with her from the very beginning of the planning. In the end, I had to admit that I was probably the stupidest of them all, because I was there when we were planning this whole comedy thing, and it's all the same, and he still touched me. I deserved the kick in the teeth that I was going to get when it was all over, but I wasn't sure it was my family who did it. What about Peyton's family? Hell, it was like Loki was trying to trick his way back to Asgard. All the people there were good, so he thought that everyone was good. But the more I thought about it, the more I became convinced that maybe Peyton and Larry Miller deserved each other. As my father and sister looked at the child and tried to pick out what was like me and what was like Peyton, I laughed to myself at how stupid they were. "Oh my God," my sister exclaimed. "This is your child." "Of course," I said. I decided it was too early in the game to piss on someone's cornflakes, so why not let my imagination run wild? "No, stupid," she said. "I mean really. Peyton has those crazy cornflower blue eyes. You have those brown eyes that are the color of shit. My nephew has your eyes, not Peyton's. Did you notice his damn leg?" "What's wrong with his leg?" I asked, looking even harder at the glass. "There's nothing wrong with that, Sherlock," she grinned. "But he has the same mole on his right thigh as you. This mole is dead center on the right thigh. Have you seen it?" "Oh, that," I said. What Summer didn't realize was that Larry also had brown eyes, and moles as birthmarks were quite common. My baby and I had the same mole spot. It's definitely a coincidence, but for all I know, Larry could have had the same spot too. We went back to the room and Summer continued to talk about his eyes and his damn mole. She, my mother, and even the nurses went crazy talking about how much the baby looked like me. I felt bad. What made it even worse for me was that Peyton joined them. A smile even appeared on her face, which made me feel even worse. It was like she was having fun while we were lying to all these good people who only wanted the best for her and her baby. I began to wonder how they would all feel when Larry returned to pick up his family. Will they feel stupid? And will they blame me? I probably wouldn't care because when this is all over, I'll be heading out of town. I was going to go to Boston and meet with the money I saved to make my first year there easier. The only problem was that I didn't manage to save much money. Buying a house and furnishing it for Peyton and her baby limited the amount I could save. Of course, I could always sell the house. Peyton will probably move back in with her parents, so she won't need him. I had to talk to her about this as soon as I got the chance. When my mom and dad left, dragging Summer with them, I felt terrible. "Will, come here and sit with me," Peyton smiled. She surprised me. Her face lit up like a Christmas tree, and I just felt terrible for lying to all these people. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked. "You look a little pale." She pressed my hand to hers and kissed it. I almost threw up. She's just been doing this for too long. Trying to launch your bullshit on people who don't suspect anything is one thing, but I thought we were friends. I thought I deserved better than that, but apparently she saw me as just another person to deceive. Everything was fine as long as Peyton got what she wanted. "It always happens," said a voice from behind us. "Your father looked that way every time too, Peyton. The first time, he wondered if we could survive financially. When you're a young couple and haven't been together that long, adding a child to the family seems scary. When it's just the two of you, you know, that you can survive on anything. You can eat chips and soda and almost live in love. But when you bring a child into the equation, especially in the beginning, the responsibility seems enormous. You two can handle it." I turned around and saw the older version of Peyton. I was amazed. And although I tried to hide it, I was jealous. I felt cheated. I deserved a chance to see Peyton grow into this woman. They say if you want to see what your wife will be like in 20 or so years, look at her mother. I was looking at the woman I would want to be married to in my 40s. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Peyton asked. She started crying, and I couldn't stand it. I turned on protection mode. "Your brother and both of your sisters have come to see their nephew," she said. "Julie and Jeff came to visit you too. Even your father was here yesterday to see his grandson. He won't admit it, but he won't lie. He gets angry and changes the subject, but he was here. So I decided I could come too. I love your father, Peyton, and always will. But you are my daughter, and what's done is done. You made a mistake, as your father says. When you left 8 months ago, he called you all sorts of biblical names and said that you have sinned before God and your family. Now he just says it was a mistake, but admits that you're trying to put it behind you. Peyton, when you came and told us about it, I was in shock. But even that day, when you ran up to your room and I called William, who arrived immediately, I began to doubt that you were mistaken. When he stood in front of your father and took you out of there, I began to doubt even more. Maybe what you did wasn't what we wanted for you, but you're happy and my grandson is the most beautiful baby I've ever seen. Even now, when I look at you two together and the way you look at each other, I'm ashamed to say, but your father was wrong. You are coping without us. In fact, I think we need you more than we need you. I'll go look at the baby, I said. That way you can talk a little. When I got out of bed, I noticed it again. Peyton seemed reluctant to let go of my hand. She kept her fingers intertwined with mine until the last moment, until we separated. This made me even more angry. The woman even tried to deceive her own mother. A couple of days later, Peyton came home and I had to go back to work. My mom came over to help Peyton with the baby. For some reason that doctors could not explain, Peyton remained very weak after giving birth. She had low iron levels, causing her to become out of breath after even the slightest activity. They discussed this back in the hospital. What shocked me was one day when I was bringing Peyton breakfast. It was not my mother who came to sit with her, but her mother. "What would you like for breakfast, dear?" she asked as she entered the room. "Oh, you're already eating." "Will takes great care of me, Mom," Peyton said. "I see," her mother said. "Will, I'll make dinner. You just go to work and don't worry about it." "It's complicated," I said. When her mother went into the nursery to check if Wiljuar was awake, I looked at Peyton. "It won't take long," I whispered. She had a strange expression on her face that I had never seen on her before while we were together. On my way to work, I thought about that expression. I realized that Peyton was probably some kind of control freak, and my decision to dictate any phase of how our contemporary marriage proceeded angered her. I began to feel that the sooner it was over, the better. When I got home that evening, I noticed her mom's car was still in the driveway, and there were several other cars there. If her mom cooked dinner and stayed the night, it might give me time to work on some of the house projects I've been neglecting in recent weeks. I parked my Mustang in the garage and walked out the door that led into my yard, and there he was. "You have plenty of space here," he said. "I like the deck you're building. It'll be nice when you're finished." And then he returned to my house. Every word he said simply implied that everything we had was not good enough for his daughter. He also implied that I was not worthy of his daughter. He also hinted that she wouldn't be here for long. He said "you," referring to a lot of space here. This meant that if I were as successful as Peyton deserved, I could afford to hire professionals to do the construction. All his one-sided communication just made me angry. Then there was the way this scoundrel started talking to me as if we were friends or he was some kind of mentor in my life. It seemed like in his twisted mind, the whole incident of him kicking his daughter out never happened. Perhaps he wanted to think that I stormed the castle and begged for the hand of the princess, and he reluctantly gave it to me, and therefore could give me wise advice from time to time. I think I should have just forgotten that he kicked his own daughter out like trash and didn't care what happened to her because of his twisted religious views on parenting. In the end, I had to admit that this scoundrel had me in a vice, although he did not understand it. To get rid of Peyton, I needed to get along with him so she could fit back into her family. This evening was a big step towards that. The whole family was there. There was Julie. Jeff offered to come over the weekend and help me with the deck. I met a little sister, Penny, who was a year younger than Peyton. I saw her in the hospital and didn't associate her with others because her perfection was overshadowed by the fact that she wore glasses. But when she took them off to wipe them down, the resemblance could clearly be seen. After that, glasses only made her even more attractive. Peyton got out of bed to sit at the table and eat dinner with us. I looked after her, and she liked it. I even carried her back to bed while her mom and sisters were almost crying at how romantic it was. If it weren't for her father, whose disparaging comments detracted from everything we did or had, it would have been a really good evening, albeit a false one. This continued for the next few weeks. We did various family activities that brought both families and our neighbors together into one big extended family. I tried to keep my family away from all of this to limit the amount of pain they would feel when it was all over, but it failed. Soon, Peyton's mom and my mom ended up in the same book club and bridge club. My mother even started going to church sometimes and joining many women's activities and charity events. I knew it was time for the final act, so one evening I sat down to talk to Peyton. "Peyton, I think it's time," I said. She just smiled at me and answered, "It's time, dear, but the doctor said that after giving birth, everything down there was torn, and he wants to wait until the inflammation goes away completely. But believe me, I want you no less than you want me, maybe even more. You shouldn't have started this. We'll be doing this a lot." "Peyton, what are you talking about?" I asked. "About making love, silly," she said, smiling. "Isn't that what you were talking about?" I just nodded, and we continued. We had a few more dinners with both sides of the family and a big picnic with everyone. By midsummer, our house became the place where everyone gathered. The only problem, again, was her father. He wasn't the only one who constantly talked about how everything we have was never great, only good or normal. He started talking about how he always wanted things to work out for Peyton. One evening, he went too far, and I had to politely excuse myself and leave the table. "Peyton, do you remember that nice guy you met a couple of times, Larry Miller? Well, he's a young man who's making it in the world. He's already made a name for himself in the sales world. I heard from a business partner that he won some kind of sales prize. He lives in New York now. He bought himself a huge old mansion, and he's renovating the whole thing. It will cost millions when he's finished," he said. Then, seeing how everyone was looking at him, he lightened the situation. "It's not like your little house here isn't cozy, but Larry Miller, that's the guy." I'm sure John realized his comments about Larry Miller hurt me as I left the table. And like most bullies, once he discovered my weakness, he continued to exploit it every chance he got. If I got a promotion, he would pull out his Larry Miller story. When I bought Peyton a new car, her dream car, he swore that Larry Miller would have bought her a jet by then. And when he continued to irritate me, I realized that we were long past the deadline for the plan. Autumn has already arrived, and Wilgiar is 8 months old. The original idea was for us to break up in time so I could go to MIT in September. "Peyton, are you ready?" I asked. "Of course I am," she replied. "I love you, fool. I'm always ready. You were the one who attacked me while we were still in the shower last night, and I really liked it when you—" "Peyton, that's not what I meant," I said. "It's already October. Somehow we seem to have missed the planned break." "I know, Will," she said sadly. "How much time do I have?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "How long can you bear with me?" she said. "I don't want to prolong your suffering, especially considering how wonderful you have been and—" She began to cry. It was even worse than the first time I met her at the bus stop. "Peyton, you should be happy," I said. "Your plan worked just as you thought it would." She looked at me and cried even harder. "Well, it didn't work at all," she said. "He completely failed." "What do you mean?" I asked. She sat down and took my hands. "Will you believe in love at first sight?" she asked. "I guess it's possible," I said. "Hell, I believe in ghosts and even vampires, so what do I know?" "Will, when two people fall in love at first sight, it's usually just passion," she said. "They go out and have sex until they drop, wake up and find out they don't even like each other. It's awkward, and then they break up. Love isn't the same as passion. Love can involve passion, but love is more about how you feel about this person, and it should be mutual. When you love someone, you put their needs above yours. You want that person to be happy above all else. You just beam when that person walks into the room. Will, growing up, I saw you and always thought you were a good guy. You're quite nice, and a lot of the girls in town thought you'd make a good husband. Even though we'd never talked to each other before, I liked you. But when you stopped what you were doing to try to comfort me on the worst day of my life, that sympathy intensified. Like my mom said, when you came in and confronted my dad about me, that feeling became even stronger. When you started taking care of me, I knew we'd work out. But Will, that first night when you slept on that sofa and gave me your bed, I fell in love with you. I half expected you to come to my bed, and I would have let you. My stupid plan, Will, was never about getting back to my family. Will, you rubbed my belly every night and talked to our baby. I was over the moon even before we got married. I made up this whole marriage thing because I wanted to be married to you. I thought that once we got married, you would never want it to end, just like me. I hoped that you would start loving me too. My mother and even your mother are sure of that. You love me, although you never said it. I tell you 5 or 6 times a day that I love you, but you never said it. I think if I were as smart as you think, I would. I realized this a long time ago. She sighed, and another large tear fell from her eyes. So, Will, you did all of this, including changing your life plans for me. You did all of this just to give me a chance to be happy. So now it's my turn to make you happy. I'm leaving tomorrow to be with them. Can we spend one more night together, please? But if you really think this was all just to get me back to my family, then maybe you're not as smart as you always thought, she said. For a long time, we just sat in silence. I was in shock. Finally, I spoke. Peyton, I love you too, I said. I think I loved you from the very beginning, but I never thought that you would feel the same. I agreed to the marriage. Hell, I would have done anything for you. I tried to hold on because I knew that if you leave, it will kill me. Oh my God, she exclaimed. I'm in love with an idiot. She grabbed me and started showering me with kisses. Will, you changed your whole life for me. A bulldozer can't drag me away from you. We'll be together until death do us part. After that night, the years simply flew by happily. There was one incident after we had been married for about 3 years that changed the relationship between Peyton's father and me. It was Thanksgiving, and we were having dinner at her family's house. I recently received a promotion to lead my department. The whole city was talking about it. I was the youngest engineering manager in the company's history. Jeff, who was studying to be an engineer, mentioned this and asked if I could get him an internship at the company. I said I'll take care of it. A few minutes later, Peyton's father started talking about how he heard that Larry Miller had just bought a Ferrari. This car, he said, probably cost more than my house. Peyton hit the table with her knife and fork so hard that she even chipped her plate. Dad, I need to talk to you now, she said. She pointed towards her father's office, which was closed to everyone. He stood up and followed her there. It was really awkward sitting at the table after that. I helped collect the dishes and take them to the kitchen. After about 20 minutes of muffled voices from the office, Peyton walked out and closed the door behind her. Will, take your son. We're going home, she said. She didn't say a word the whole way home. She just smiled and held my hand as usual. When we got into bed that night and she reached out to me, I asked her what happened. We'll still see my mom and my siblings, but I'm just tired of all this nonsense. Every time he opened his mouth, that damn Larry Miller would come out. I hope they can be happy together. Because I'm really happy with you. Of course, I would be happier if you were in me instead of looking at me like that. I took the hint, and she was happy for a few moments. I couldn't believe she took my side so decisively. The next evening, when I returned home, I learned how determined she was to do it. This was a serious blow to her father's well-being. The first was when he found out she was pregnant. This was the second time, and he was waiting for me in the driveway when I got home. Will, can I talk to you? He asked. I was surprised because usually he just started talking and said what he wanted. Of course, I said. Let me just open the door. No, he said, grabbing my hand. I'm not sure I'm welcome there. Of course we are, sir, I said. Then I shouldn't be, he said. Will, I'm an asshole. I just realized that yesterday. I always wanted the best for all my children. I always thought you were normal, but I was never sure if you were good enough for Peyton. Yesterday, when Peyton was bragging about your accomplishments, and then Jeff started too, it was too much. I didn't know you graduated first in your class and were going to MIT for an advanced degree in engineering. Sir, it doesn't matter, I said. I'm happy and... But you could be rich and... He said, Sir, I'm rich. Peyton and Will are worth more to me than all the money in the world. I said. My daughter thinks the same about you, he said. I can't believe I was the one who ruined her life. Sir, you didn't ruin her life, I began. Yes, I destroyed it, he interrupted sharply. I'm the one who told her not to date, and even then, I had to approve of everyone she even thought about. She didn't go on a single unsupervised date until she was 21, and I literally pushed her towards that scoundrel. He deceived me too, you know. I thought I knew everything. Peyton didn't know anything about dating or men, and I just gave her to him like a lamb to the slaughter. He really left her pregnant, and then he just ran away. Her reputation and my family's would have been destroyed if it weren't for you. And I rubbed him in your face all this time. I didn't know what an asshole he was. I talked to a few people in town about him. Every time he comes to town to sell to his clients here, he still continues his scams. A leopard doesn't change its spots, sir, I said. But at the end of the day, I still feel like I got the best part of the deal. No, son, he said. Peyton got the best deal. After that, we all became one big happy family until the summer when Wiljuar, or simply Deuce, turned 8 years old. I was an attentive father. I was involved in everything he did, and Peyton and I just grew closer and closer. We were so good together that it seemed like something was bound to go wrong. It was a typical Saturday morning. Deuce and I were in the backyard. He practiced his swing at the practice pole next to the garage. Deuce was a shortstop and the best baseball player in his little league. We had a game that day, which is why I was in such a hurry to cut the grass. Peyton was gathering a few of her girlfriends to plan a big backyard party for Deuce's birthday. After I cut all the grass in the front, all I had to do was cut the grass in the back. All I had to do was use the edge trimmer and trim the bushes and plants, and we could be off to the game. Peyton attended many of the Deuce's games, but I never missed one. Most of the time, she just sat on the podium holding my hand. I think she was there more to be with me than to watch the game, but it didn't bother me. Our love life and even our sex life were more vibrant than in the beginning. I've often thought that maybe the way we met was what made us hold on to each other so tightly. But the reason didn't matter. The main thing was that we did it. We started arguing a little lately, which was unusual for us. She seemed irritable and grumpy. I thought that maybe she had been tired lately and might have gotten sick. Several of Peyton's friends were already there. They sat in the kitchen while she prepared for their meeting. My Black & Decker dual spool trimmer ran out of thread at this point. I put it against the wall of the house and went to the garage for a spare one cassette. Deuce, remember what Coach told you? I shouted to him. Don't stop on contact. Miss the ball. This way you can keep the ball at a greater distance. Got it, Dad, he said. The next blow he hit harder, and his completion would low ideal. I tapped the top of his helmet until the breastplate covered his eyes. Yes, he whined. How can I see this? You cannot see? I asked. Not at all, he said. Okay, I shouted, tickling him until he fell to the ground, screaming with laughter. We're leaving at 20, I said. When I got back to the house, I was trying to change the string cartridge when I heard them. Unfortunately, I could only make out fragments of the conversation. I was lucky that I heard what I did because they weren't even talking. Their voices were barely above a whisper. I heard one voice say, Larry Miller is back again. There was a short pause, and another said something I couldn't make out, but it ended with, she loves him. I heard, whisper best sex she's ever had. Whisper, whisper, doesn't know how to tell Will. Whisper, doesn't know how he'll take it. I was stunned. I just stood there. I guess I always knew that the bastard would come back someday. But there were rumors in the city that he was some kind of big shot. He lived in a multi-million-dollar mansion in New York and dated a supermodel. While she was out of town, he had women left and right. What the hell does he care about Peyton? Then I remembered that even though I had gotten used to her, Peyton was still the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. She was not the kind of woman that a man could forget. Perhaps Larry had simply decided that enough time had passed since he left her and came back for her. What hurt me the most was that Peyton obviously went for it. But damn, what did I expect? Women always fell in love with Larry. Peyton herself even told me that she simply couldn't resist Larry, even after the first time. She swore to herself that it wouldn't happen again, but he caught her again the next time he saw her. And all this time, I truly believed that Peyton loved me. I guess I was just the person who was there for her while Larry was away. Damn, I almost cried standing there. "Will, what are you doing?" she asked sharply, breaking me out of my thoughts. "You should be trimming bushes, not standing and looking at the ground. What's wrong with you? These bushes won't trim themselves and—" There it is again, that attitude. She treated me like her damn gardener, not her husband. The difference was that now I knew where this grumpy behavior came from. Peyton may have felt guilty about cheating on Larry, or she felt guilty for betraying me, but either way, I was done putting up with it. "Fuck you, Peyton," I suddenly blurted out. She was instantly stunned. In all our time together, I never raised my voice to her. All I ever said was, "Okay, Peyton. If trimming those damn bushes is so important to you, do it yourself," I barked. "Deuce, we're leaving," I shouted. He walked around the garage, carrying his helmet, glove, and bat. We got into the new Mustang that I bought just a month ago. This car was incredible. It wasn't a damn Ferrari like Larry's in New York, but in my opinion, it was the best Mustang ever made. 2013 was also the last year Ford built the Boss 302, making the car an instant collector's item. I pulled out of the driveway as Peyton stood there with her mouth open. She tried to call me several times throughout the day, but I just sent the calls to voicemail. I sat there watching my son play baseball and felt like my life was falling apart. I was only 32 years old, but I felt almost 100 years old. It felt like life had been sucked out of me. "Hello," said a female voice from behind. "Long time no see. If I remember, we were pretty close to each other back in the day. Then I did a really stupid thing, and you left for Peyton." I looked up and saw Katie standing there. "Will, you seem pretty depressed," she said. She sat next to me and tried to cheer me up. When the game ended, it was fun and joyful, while I was afraid of returning home. The Deuces team won the game, but their opponents also won their game earlier. To determine which of the two teams would advance to the local league finals, a single winner-take-all game had to be played. The coaches got together and decided to play the game the next day. It was a Sunday, so the winning team would have 6 days to prepare for the championship the following Saturday. Katie told me that one of her work colleagues had a son who played for another team. She gave me her business card and told me to call her anytime if I needed to talk. To be honest, I barely remember our conversation. Peyton was my whole world, and my world was in shambles. I hugged Deuce and told him he played brilliantly. "Is this worthy of ice cream or McDonald's?" he asked. I took him to McDonald's and bought him his favorite. When we walked into the yard, Peyton had a house full of her friends. Most of them helped with the preparations for Deuce's party. Even my mom, my sister, and Peyton's sisters were there. "Will, we need to talk," she said. "Peyton, maybe we should talk later," I said. "You have guests." "But Will," she began. I turned and left the room. In less than 10 minutes, I squeezed past the women and boss, and I was back on the road. I didn't know where I would go or what I would do. All I knew was that I didn't want to be around Peyton. I have to give her credit. The woman wasted no time. She was ready to have this conversation and give me orders. At least she wasn't going to cheat on me for years and drag this out. I went to a friend who handled a lot of the legal work at the plant where I worked. When I told him what I wanted, he ran his hand over my forehead. "You are crazy?" he asked. "Why do you want to divorce her?" Didn't you understand the part where she cheated on me?" I said. "Just accept it," he said. "This woman is amazing." "There is no woman worth giving up your dignity for," I said. "You are sure?" he asked. "You look really pathetic." "Just give me the papers," I said. "Okay, it will take 3 days," he said. "These are standard documents. Character incompatibility. You get half. She gets half, plus alimony and probably a house." No child support, I said. And I'm leaving the house. She'll probably live in a mansion in New York. He looked at me, then said, Larry Miller? I just nodded. Boy, I need to tell you something, he said, smiling. Save it for next time, I said. He seemed really interested in talking, but I walked away. Just like the first conversation I once had with Peyton's father, I had to let him talk to me. After leaving the office, I just drove around the city. Peyton called me a couple of times, but I didn't listen to the messages she left or answer her calls. The whole time I was driving, there was an annoying little voice in my head. I told you, he continued. Why would someone like her want to be with a jerk like you, Charlie Brown? This reminded me of the question I asked myself when I started this little story of unhappy love. Finding out that Peyton was cheating on me and what other women whispered was the most painful moment of my life. As I drove aimlessly around the city, it seemed to me that a bullet to the head was the best solution. And I'm not talking about Stallone's latest movie. The small town feels resurfaced. There were only a few places I could go before I started repeating myself, and it got boring. I played Evanescence's Whisper over and over again because it suited my mood perfectly. I guess that showed how angry I was. Peyton, despite the fact that we usually spent Sundays in bed, still held on to some of her fanatical Catholic beliefs. There were bands that, even though she had never listened to them, she associated with devil worship. Evanescence was one of those bands. Finally, when I had a chance to think, I decided that I was not doing myself any favors. I behaved like a child. Running away from a problem never solved anything. Besides, if Peyton had made her choice, there was nothing I could do. This was my chance to do what I should have done from the beginning. This was my chance to take control of my destiny. I needed to move on. The best possible scenario was to take my experience and finally leave this city. Of course, I settled down here, but that was only because I had Peyton and too. I'm only 32 years old. It's not too late to find a woman who loves me for who I am and have children of my own. Perhaps in Boston, which is a large and modern city, there are even several women who could compete with Peyton in beauty. But in reality, I'm tired of spoiled, pampered women. Perhaps next time I will choose a woman for true love, and not just fall in love with a beautiful face. I needed to stay calm and handle the situation much better than I had before. I needed 2 more days for my lawyer to prepare the documents. Then I would take a day off from work and head to Boston to see what I could start there. I will immediately start searching for a job online on Monday at work, or even tomorrow after the 2 game. I drove up to my house and waved to the departing ladies. I went up to play video games with my son while Peyton talked to the last remaining guests. She walked past the room several times and smiled, but I pretended not to see her. Two was tired from playing that day, and I could tell that even though it was still light outside, he was starting to fall asleep. You have to play your best tomorrow, champ, I told him, so you better go to bed. A few minutes later, he was already asleep. I went back downstairs and went out into the garage. I got out the hose, buckets, and all my car wash supplies. I had just soaped up the car after rinsing it thoroughly when Peyton came outside. She stood and watched me for a while, and I pretended not to notice her presence. She had the biggest smile on her face as she watched me. There was something so sexy about her that I couldn't help but get angry again. Why the hell did she choose me to manipulate me? There are probably hundreds of guys in the city. I knew I had been unfair to her. I was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, and at every stage I always had the choice to leave. She even proposed marriage to me. I could have said no at any time. Perhaps she saw this as just another step. She probably thought she could sleep with Larry from time to time and then come home to me. I read about similar things on the internet, but I'm just not that kind of guy. Will, she said, tapping me on the shoulder. Can we talk? No need, I said. I already know everything. Well, I can see you're not happy, but can I at least explain it to you from my point of view? She said. This is something I didn't plan for, Will. It just happened, and She began. Tell the truth for once, Peyton, I said. much angrier than I had planned. This is something you've been thinking about in your heart for a long time, right? You've probably thought about this from the very beginning. Is it really that big of a deal? She asked in anger. Does everything we do have to fit into some grand plan you have in mind? She asked. Peyton, I could never plan anything with us. Since I met you, I feel like I'm just reacting to what you want and trying to make you happy. So maybe it shouldn't be anything special compared to everything else. Just do what you want. You know, Will, maybe I really don't know you as well as I thought, she said. She looked like she was about to cry. I once thought that this would make you happy. Somehow I thought that even if you don't really like it, you will see how happy it makes me, how fulfilled I feel, and it will make you happy too. Next thing I know, she left crying, and I was even more angry. I turned up the volume on the music in my headphones. When they got to the end of the song, instead of voices whispering in Latin, I could still hear those two women whispering about Peyton and Larry. I became even more angry and had to calm down. After I washed the car, I went into the kitchen to have a snack. Peyton came in while I was rummaging through the refrigerator. Do you want me to cook you something? She asked calmly. No, thank you, I answered just as calmly. She looked at me strangely. Okay then, she said. But I don't want crumbs in my bed, so. Don't worry about it, Peyton, I interrupted. I'll sleep in another room. No, you won't, she hissed. Just because we don't agree on what I do with my body doesn't mean you can. Stop, Peyton, I said. I'm trying to stay calm here as much as possible, so I want you to listen to me for the first time. It doesn't matter what we feel or what we have felt before. There are more important things to do here. For example, Tu has the most important game of his life tomorrow. If his team wins, they will advance to the championship final next week. We don't need to wake him up because we're fighting. Can we give him a chance to be the center of attention without ruining his moment by making this our argument? She nodded. You're a good father, Will, she said. That's why. Peyton, you can't have it all, I interrupted. And that's always been one of your problems. Even in the beginning, Peyton, I agreed to this because I loved you too much. But from the beginning, it was you, cheating on Larry, and I cared about you. Her eyes narrowed when I said that. But now you come in here and tell me that we don't agree on what you want to do with your body, but you want to tell me where I can lay my body to sleep. You can't have it all, Peyton, I said. Will, I don't know what's been going on with you lately, she said. You've been acting crazy all day, but when you come to your senses. Peyton, you treated me like crap all week, I protested. But this morning I found out why and... So you understand then, she said. I think maybe we need a few days apart to process this, I said. Will, I don't want a few hours without you, she said tearfully, but I'll do whatever you want. And she left the kitchen. Good night, Will, she sobbed. The next morning I woke up early and prepared breakfast for two. This way he would be ready for his game. I wasn't hungry and, strangely enough, Peyton wasn't up either. I couldn't believe she wasn't going to come to the game. But perhaps she had a chance to sneak out and meet Larry, which was more important than her child's happiness. Or maybe it was just that Larry got all the fun and I got all the responsibility as usual. We arrived at the baseball field quite early. We were there an hour before the game started. I muttered a greeting to a few other parents and sat in the bleachers to watch the warm-ups. Right before the game started, I realized why Peyton wasn't there, or at least that's what I thought. It was Sunday, and Peyton always loved 11 o'clock mass. The game started right on time. I waved to Katie when I saw her in the stands. She told me the day before that a work colleague of hers has a child who plays on another team. We beat this team yesterday. Their season is over. I couldn't think of a reason for a coworker or coworker's child to be here. I also noticed that she was sitting alone. I didn't invite her to sit next to me because I wanted to be alone. She seemed to talk a lot on the phone. I tried to concentrate on the game, but I couldn't. My thoughts went back to Peyton. I couldn't believe I was so naive. By the fourth inning, it was clear that the game would be tough. The lead changed hands several times, and by the end of the fourth inning, we had a one-run lead that I knew wouldn't hold. I looked at two and whistled loudly as he caught the ball and took out the batter at first base, then returned to his position like a pro. I barely noticed someone sitting down on the bench next to me. "Which one is my child?" he asked. I thought he said, "Which one is your baby?" "Shortstop," I answered without hesitation. "Oh, he's good," he said. "He's like me at his age." Of course, I played football, not baseball. I turned around and saw Larry Miller's smiling face. I felt anger like I had never known in my life. I told myself I had to hold back. As we watched, Larry applauded and whistled along with everyone else. "Hey, why does he have your last name?" he asked. I ignored him. "Why does everyone call him Two when his number is 18? He continued. "Two is a nickname," I replied. "Instead of calling him Junior, we call him Two." "Wait," he said. "You named my damn baby after yourself. You're cool, man." Two's team won in the last inning. They were able to score 3 runs in the top inning to take a 2-run lead and held it with solid defensive play. "See you later," Larry said. "I'm going to meet my child." I jumped off the stands, skipping the end and going down the stairs. When Larry left the stands, I stood in front of him. "Larry, stay away from him," I said. He smiled, looking at me. Larry wasn't much bigger than me, but he was bigger. "Why can't I see my own child?" he asked. "Because he's not your damn child," I said. "You gave up all rights to see him, date him, or do anything else with him when you skipped town as soon as Peyton told you she was pregnant." I had more important things to do in life than to be tied to some small-town beauty queen, he said. "But now I'm back, and I'm going to be a part of my son's life." We became louder and louder, so much so that many people started watching us. Larry tried to push me, and I lost control. I hit him in the face as hard as I could. The first blow made him stagger. The second blow knocked him down, and I followed him to the ground, continuing to punch him even after he stopped even trying to defend himself. I felt hands trying to pull me away from Larry, and then everything went black. Peyton. I've never had to puke. I woke up Sunday morning with a knot in my stomach that I've had for the past week or so. I reached for Will, and then remembered that he slept in the guest room last night. I still didn't understand why he acted like a creep. In all the time that we were together, this was the first time that we disagreed on some issue, and it was already too late to change anything. Nothing could be done. This was already irreversible. When I looked at the clock after my shower, I noticed that time was passing much faster than I thought. It was already too late to even do what I had planned for that day. I planned to show up to Two's game to sit next to Will in the stands. I love my son. The only thing that can compare to this is my love for his father. But baseball is so boring. This makes no sense. I mostly went to games to steal some more time with my husband. I like to sit there holding his hand. I love seeing him stand up and whistle when Two does something. He is a much better and more involved father than I ever dreamed of being. It's a good thing Two has 2 parents because I missed this game. Now the only question left was whether I should be the joyful championship mom or the comforting mom. We'll get them next year. When a car drove into our yard, I felt strange. It didn't sound like Will's Mustang. I walked to the door and saw Tom entering the house with a big smile on his face. But his trainer was following him, his face showing concern. "Hi, Two," I said. "Congratulations, dear. Where is your dad?" "He had to do something with the sheriff," Two said, raising his trophy in front of my face. "When Dad comes, we'll go to McDonald's," he smiled. "We always go to McDonald's." He ran upstairs to his room excitedly. "Ron, where is Will?" I asked. Ron was the Two-team coach and a family friend. "Peyton, Will is in jail," Ron said. "He beat Larry Miller to a pulp. Luckily, it was after the game, and all the kids were on the field waiting for their trophies. They had to use a stun gun, Peyton. I've never seen Will or anyone else so angry in my life. It was scary. It was as if he was fighting for his life. Nobody here really likes Larry Miller. He's a bastard and always has been. He's engaged to 2 or 3 girls who work all over the city and always comes back to New York. Yes, I said. He was just as slippery when we were in college. I haven't seen him for many years. God, my son is 8 years old, so it's been almost 9 years since I last saw him. Well, you really need to hear this, Ron said. Larry has been bragging about how successful he is in New York for years. He is said to be married to a supermodel, lives in a mansion in New York, and drives a Ferrari. None of these statements are true. Not a word of this is true. Larry is just a salesman, and not even a very good one. He lives in a 4th-floor apartment with no elevator and doesn't even have a car. Even when he has a few sales, all his money goes to lawyers trying to file divorces. Larry never married, but he had affairs with a lot of really stupid married women and was caught and listed in their divorces. Some husbands sued him for alienation of feelings or for actions that led to the dissolution of their marriages. He has no pot to pee in or a window to throw him out of. I laughed when he said that. That's what he's supposed to do, I said. But wait, Peyton, here's the fun part, he laughed. A couple of years ago, one of these husbands beat Larry almost to death. And from what I've heard, he can't have any more children. And you know how it happens. We always want what we don't have most, and... Thanks for the information, Ron, I said. I need to go to the sheriff's office now and pick up Will. Yeah, he said. See you at the game next week, Peyton. I was shaking all over as I dialed the phone number. Ron didn't know what was happening. No one in town knew that 2 was not Will's child. No wonder Will got into a fight with Larry. It was stupid. But maybe that's why Will was so angry with me. He was afraid that Larry would ruin my reputation and possibly our family. He was right. It was all my fault. I brought it all on us. But if I had to take a serious look at the situation, I'm glad it happened. I was glad I slept with Larry, although I can't remember why I did it. All I remember is that when Larry was next to me, I just wanted to sleep with him. The sex itself was terrible. Larry must have had some sort of strange pheromone. I knew several other women who told similar stories. For many years, I didn't think about Larry anymore. The only man I loved was my husband, and now I needed to find someone to watch my son so I could get Will out of prison. I called Summer, Will's sister, and asked her to babysit. She arrived before I even had time to get dressed. It only took me 10 minutes to drive to the sheriff's office, and not even a minute after I walked in, 3 sheriff's deputies stood in front of me. The woman who was there before I arrived looked at us and said angrily, "Do you 3 need to service her? I've been sitting here for an hour and—" They ignored her. "How can we help you, madam?" asked one. "My name is Peyton and—" I began. "Oh, we already know who you are, Mrs. Place," the same person said. "Okay, I came to find out what I need to do to get my husband out of here. He was brought in for fighting," I said. "It was more like a massacre," the second deputy interjected. "I'd say it was more like farming or recycling," added a third. "All he did was smash a piece of shit on the ground. I don't even think he should have been arrested." "Give me a minute, I'll find out what you need to do to get him," the first deputy said. "Usually, if he has no previous offenses, you can just sign for him and take him home. Sometimes bail or surety is required depending on what he is charged with. If Miller agrees not to press charges, we should let him go. But in this case, there were no weapons, so I don't see a problem. I'll be right back." The short, stocky woman just looked at me angrily as I walked away from the counter. 3 minutes later, the first deputy, who had gone deeper, returned and looked unhappy. "Mrs. Place, we have a problem," he said, lowering his head. "Do you accept checks?" I asked. He smiled. "Madam, we accept everything. We accept cash, checks, credit cards, debit cards, money orders, and in some cases even IAS, but that's not a problem." "So what's the problem, deputy?" I asked. "He refuses for you to discharge him," he said. "Will has gone too far." "Deputy, I need to talk to my husband," I said. "I will resolve everything right now." He just started shaking his head. "He doesn't want to talk to you," he said. "It makes no sense to me, madam. I would follow you anywhere." But that's what he said. I was hurt more than I had ever been in my life. I started crying for the first time since then. It took me a while to remember. The only time I cried after we got married was when he tried to leave our marriage because he didn't know how much I loved him. "Wait, madam," he said. "I have an idea. If we let him out, he should come home and you can talk to him. So if you go to the clinic and convince Larry, the piece of shit Miller, to drop the charges, we won't have a reason to keep him, so we have to let him go." "Thank you, deputy," I said, wiping away tears. When I turned to leave, all three deputies watched me leave. "Maybe someone will help me now," said the short, angry woman. "Someone will deal with you soon," one of the deputies said. I drove the 2 blocks to the clinic and walked up to the front desk. Behind the counter was Paul in French, one of my mother's friends. "Hello, Mrs. Saint French," I said. "Can I see Larry Miller, please?" "I'm not sure it's a good idea for a married woman to see him," she said. "I can handle it," I said. "There's only one man on the planet for me, and that's not Larry Miller." She told me which room Larry Miller was in. I walked down the corridor and found his room. I didn't even knock. I just walked in. I was furious. Larry looked bad. He seemed dazed, and the nurse tried to hold him up so he could button his shirt. His mouth twisted when he saw me. I think he tried to smile, but his lips were swollen and broken. Both his eyes were blackened, and his nose seemed crooked. Larry looked much fatter than I remembered. He seemed flabby. I was shocked to notice that he was wearing some sort of corset to make himself appear slimmer. "Larry," I said. He smiled again and said, "Hi, Peyton." I think his broken mouth prevented him from pronouncing my name correctly. "Sit on the bed before you fall, idiot," I said. "We need to talk." "That's exactly what I was thinking," he said. The nurse who was helping him smiled and left the room. It was strange, even with his beaten face, the nurse, who was barely in her 20s, was clearly delighted with him. I started to think that maybe everything that happened to him wasn't his fault. He wasn't a bad guy. I caught myself thinking this when I remembered that, bad guy or not, he got me pregnant and then ran away. And this was no accident. He assured me that everything would be fine and that the home test was incorrect or inaccurate while he took his exams early and left town. "You need to drop the charges against Will right now," I said. "That bastard should be in jail," he mumbled. "He didn't want me to see my own child. He even named my child after himself." "Larry, he's not your son," I lied. I had to concentrate because what I was about to say was bothering me. And this is not because lying was a sin. I would lie to God for the sake of my husband or child. But I didn't want to offend Larry. I wanted Larry and I to remain friends for some crazy reason. "I had a miscarriage a few weeks after you left," I lied again. "After that I met Will, although we always knew each other from school, and I became pregnant again. I named my son William James Place, Jr., because he was to bear his father's name, and Will turned out to be a better father than you could ever be with all your lies." He smiled at me through his broken lips. "So I was beaten in vain?" he laughed. I realized that this story amused him. "Larry, you're lucky too isn't your son," I continued. "Listen, beauty," he said through a ruined mouth. "Just because you're beautiful doesn't mean there's something in your head. You do not understand anything. I need this damn baby. I have no brothers or sisters. I have no family at all. And since I have no children, my last name will end with me. I always thought that I still had a lot of time. I thought that one day I would settle down with the perfect woman and we would have a wonderful family, but I ruined everything. Your child was my last chance, and that damn Katie started all this in vain. Larry, if he were your son, you would owe me about $30,000 a year for his support. I could put you in jail for running away, so you're really lucky that he's not your son," I said. And before I finished speaking, the words he had just said came to me. "What the hell do you mean Katie started this whole thing?" I hissed. "She always hated you for taking Will away from her," he said. "Every time I'm in town, I sleep with her and we chat. I told her about my child with you. I don't think she knew about your miscarriage. When she saw Will at the baby play yesterday, she remembered that I wanted a baby and reminded me that I already had one. She decided that the two of us could separate you and Will. She'll get Will, and I'll get my baby, or at least be involved in his life. What about me? I asked. It seemed shocking that it was all about my husband and my son and the destruction of my beautiful family. But this time it wasn't about me. Listen, you're beautiful, he said, but you're terrible in bed. But I'll sleep with you if that's what you want. I'm sure you have fond memories of the last time we were together. But to be honest, this is getting boring. Come on, take off your clothes. Your husband is probably already into Katie. I began to unbutton her blouse, despite the fact that she hated him. I've had sex with him before, and at least this time, even if he's lying, he won't be able to get pregnant from me, I thought. Then his words were heard again. I hated him. Was I even thinking about sex with him? I am a married woman, and I love my husband more than anything in the world. If I did that, I would lose Will, and I wouldn't lose my Will over Larry Miller. He needed that pheromone thing to be very strong. The only thing that stopped me from sleeping with him was what he just said. My head was spinning as if I had been drugged with something. I buttoned my blouse again. What do you mean when you say Will is with Katie? I growled in his face. My mind was no longer confused, and I became angry. Will was mine, and no one was going to take him away from me. Just before you arrived, Katie called me and told me the game had started, he said. She got him out of jail and took him back to her place. I was angrier than I had ever been in my life. Where does this bitch live? I asked. I think he saw something in my eyes because he told me that without hesitation. You need to call the sheriff's office and drop the charges now, because if Will even goes to court, I will sue you for getting pregnant and running away from me. I lied again. He just nodded his head and collapsed back onto the table. I broke every speed limit in town when I got to Katie's house. I drove straight to her lawn, chewing the grass as I did so. I knocked on the door and no one answered, but I saw two figures on the couch in her living room. I squinted, trying to peer through the curtains covering the large windows in her living room, and noticed that the smaller figure had pulled another one towards him. This bitch tried to seduce my husband. That's all. I grabbed the heavy lawn chair on her porch and threw it at the glass window. After all the glass fell, I entered her living room and walked straight towards her. The bitch took off her blouse and bra and was left only in panties. She pressed her large, saggy breasts against Will's chest. He looked depressed. She was like a deer caught in the headlights of a car. Will was fully dressed. "You're dead, bitch," I said. Even as I said this, she ran to one of the open doors and slammed it behind her. "Get out of my house," she screamed through the door. "I'll call the sheriff." "Okay, I'm leaving," I shouted. "Please don't call the sheriff." I stepped back onto the glass as if I was leaving, and then again jumped up to the door behind which it had closed. She opened the door and went out to look around. As soon as she came out, I grabbed her by the hair and threw her to the floor. I started spanking her, pulling her hair, yelling at her, and scratching her face. Will pulled me away from her, and she crawled into my corner. "Now you're going to jail," she hissed. "We'll be there together," I hissed back, "and I will beat you again. I just talked to Larry, and he told me that it was your plan to keep us apart from the very beginning. As soon as Will saw you in the park yesterday, you—" "But this started long before yesterday, Peyton," Will said. "It started when I heard your two friends whispering while I was cutting the grass yesterday morning." "Is that why you're so angry with me, darling?" I asked. He nodded, and a large tear rolled down his cheek. "What were they whispering about that made you so angry?" "I really thought you'd be happy," I said. "I was just working up the courage to tell you myself." "Peyton, are you crazy?" he said sharply. "Why should I be happy when I heard that you slept with Larry? I love you so much it hurts, Peyton." I just laughed, and he looked at me like I was crazy. I walked up to him and tried to hug him, but he pulled away from me. I tilted my head and smiled at him. "Will, stop being stupid," I said. "You love me, fool. I haven't even thought about Larry since the first time I was with you. Since you found me crying at the bus stop, no other man has even touched me, let alone had sex with me. I'm all yours, idiot. Peyton, I heard your two friends talking, he said, keeping his distance from me. I took out my phone and called Millie and Terry. I gave them Katie's address. The sheriff drove up in his Jeep. Looks like someone called them because I broke a window. He knocked on the door and looked at Katie with a bleeding face. Will, please tell me you didn't hit the woman this time, he said. It was an accident, Sheriff, Katie said. When the window broke, I received several cuts. Nothing happens here. The sheriff drove away, shaking his head. The three of us just sat there, looking at each other, and I smiled at Will. Why are you smiling? He asked. You'll be kissing my ass in a few minutes, I grinned. Why am I going to kiss your ass? He asked. For 3 reasons, I said. First of all, because you'll feel stupid when I prove to you that no one said that I slept with Larry because I didn't do it. You'll feel guilty for blaming me, so you'll kiss my ass. The second reason is when you find out what they were really talking about. I think you will really be happy like I told you, and you will kiss my ass. And the third reason? He asked. I have a very nice ass, I said. And you just like to kiss her and bite her and... Okay, we get it, Katie chimed in, just as my friends rang the doorbell. Millie knocked on the door, and Terry simply walked in through the broken window. Hi, Terry, I said, smiling. Talk to my husband. Tell him the truth about anything he wants to know. Hi, Will, Terry said. Ask. What were you and Millie talking about in my kitchen yesterday morning? We talked about a few things, she said. Do you want to know about everything, or is there something specific? I want to hear how she slept with Larry Miller, I said. We never talked about it, Terry said. I'm her best friend along with you. I know all her secrets, including 9 years ago before you two met, and she never mentioned it. I don't think they've seen each other since you two started dating. Then what about? Will began in irritation. I remember telling her that Larry Miller was back in town, Millie said, but we didn't talk about him. We immediately changed the subject because Peyton was yelling about how you left hair in the sink after shaving. I told Terry I don't understand why Peyton stays with you. And I said she was staying because she loved him, Terry said. And I said it's probably because it's the best sex she's ever had, even though it's the only sex she's ever had, Millie said. And I said that Terry began before Peyton covered her mouth with her hand. He doesn't need to know that part, I said. Well, then I said something to the effect that she didn't know what to tell Will, Terry continued. And I said she doesn't know how he'll react, Millie said. Did you hear all this? Well, parts of it, Will said. And he started thinking I slept with Larry Miller, I laughed. What an idiot. Will came over and hugged me then. I'm sorry, honey, he said, wiping away his tears in relief. But you've been treating me like crap for the last week, he said. I know, honey, and when we get home and get into our bed, I'll fix everything, I chuckled. But you will be very happy. Millie and Terry smiled as they watched us kiss, and then walked out through the broken window. Hey, what about my damn window? Said Katie. You deserve this for your stupid plan, I snapped at her. Just use it as a door. This works better than your damn plan. Half an hour later, we returned home. Will promised to buy McDonald's for 2 on the way home from work the next day, and by the time we put him to bed together, everything in our world was right again. I was a happy girl, although a little nervous, as I prepared to finally tell my husband my news. Honey, you missed 2's game this morning, I told Will. It's okay, he replied. With you next to him, he didn't even notice that I wasn't there. That's why kids have 2 parents, you know. I gently kissed his neck. Guess what I told Larry, I continued. Will tensed next to me, and I pulled him back. We'll never have to worry about him again, I said. I told him I had a miscarriage, and then I got pregnant again a few weeks later, I continued. Now only you, me, and my father know, and I will force my father to remain silent about this, I smiled. And that brings me to our new news, darling, I said, squeezing his hand tightly even as he leaned in to kiss me. I was so irritable and tired in the mornings, dear. That's why I behaved so badly and why I missed Tu's game. Will, I'm pregnant again, and this time there's no doubt who the father is. Will seemed to lose consciousness because he suddenly collapsed onto his back. Then he leaned over and started kissing me. Are you happy? I asked. Do you want a baby with me? I want it already, he said as he burst into my mouth with his tongue. He lowered his hand to remove my panties and noticed that I had already done so. So why did you tell the girls before me? He asked. Well, stupid, they work in the doctor's office, I said. So they actually told me, but you are the first to know about this after me. After that, I rushed to Will. There was an urgent need simmering within me that pushed me forward. Sex with Will was always magical. Take me, Larry, take. Everything stopped then. Before I could grab him, Will pulled out of me and grabbed his clothes. Before I could even begin to figure out what to say, I heard the bedroom door slam loudly. Before I could get out of bed, with tears in my eyes, he was already out of the house. Before I could reach the stairs, I saw his car pull out of the driveway. I tried to call him 10 times that evening. Ron came over Monday afternoon to pick Tu up for baseball practice. Will brought him back after practice, but didn't even go into the house. I was actually going to go to practice on Wednesday to try and talk to Will and try to explain everything. Unfortunately, the divorce papers arrived that day. I cried all day. It was difficult for me to look at my son's sad face. I didn't know what to tell him. I also didn't know what Will told him. The one your dad said about where he sleeps and why, I asked him. He said he had to stay with Grandma and Grandpa place for a while because they were old and needed his help. He replied, I miss him. Why can't I stay there too? Because your mom misses you here, I said. I can't be without both my men. The next day, I hired my lawyer. I told him the whole situation, and he answered me with legal jargon. I had him draw up a court order and have the judge sign it. Tu's last baseball practice before the championship game was Thursday. Ron wanted to give the team a day of rest before the big game. I knew Will wouldn't miss this workout. He never missed a single Tu training session. I got there early, and when he walked under the stands, I showered him with confetti. What is this? He asked me a few minutes later. It's your damn divorce papers, I blurted out. I looked around to make sure no one was listening to us. Will, I was wrong. You know, Larry does strange things to women, and I spent almost an hour with him. I didn't sleep with him. I didn't even touch him. But I can't control my subconscious. So your subconscious wants to have sex with Larry, he said. Fine. My subconscious wants a divorce. Well, my subconscious got the judge to sign a restraining order that forces you to move home until your baby. Your next baby is born, I said, handing him the paper. It was a big risk on my part. All the lawyers in court laughed at my lawyer when he tried to do this. No judge in the world could force a man to stay in the house until the birth of the child. But I knew Will. Deep down, he loved me and wanted to be with me, so I knew he would never challenge it. You are also expected to treat this child with the same care and attention as you did to Tu, I continued. That means you have to talk to her and rub her mother's belly and... Is this a girl? He asked. I nodded. It won't change anything, he said. As soon as she is born, I will leave again. I will work like hell and your child's support will never be late, but this was my last straw. But I didn't do anything, I said. How would you feel if I started screaming Katie's name while we were having sex? He asked. If in my most intimate moment I was thinking about someone else? That would hurt, I said. He nodded and started to leave. Will, I called. I'll be back tomorrow, he said. I'll follow orders, but we're done. 7 months is a long time for me to resist, I said. I'll throw everything I have at you, Will. Before your daughter is born, you will love me even more than you already do. After everything we've been through, there's no way my marriage will end because of a whisper. Will, this is where I find myself today. I don't know what to feel or what to do. All I know is that I love Peyton more than anything in the world, and she swears that she loves me even more. Besides, I don't know what to feel or what to do. I know she didn't cheat on me, and she swears she never will. But does what she did mean she could ever do it? Does that mean she wants it? Or maybe I'm just a victim of an inferiority complex because deep down I doubt that I'm special enough for her. Just like last time, Peyton's pregnancy only made her even more attractive. I stroke her belly and talk to my daughter every evening and sometimes more often. Peyton works her magic on me, and although I haven't gotten back to having sex with her yet, I've been letting her kiss me again lately. And she suggested that in case of complications, we should probably sleep together so I could be close. Once we start doing that, it's only a matter of time until she tries something. What should I do? End. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.